I'm from Roswell, New Mexico, born and raised. I grew up dealing with the bullshit alien nonsense my entire life. The whole town is a tourist attraction for people who believe in aliens and believe there was actually a UFO that crashed here in the early 50s. Gift shops, cheap souvenirs, strange people galore. I'm a very logical thinker, and I've had many strange things happen to me in the past, but I've always dealt with them in a this can be logically explained mindset since I can remember. But what I'm about to write is something I cannot explain, and it's also something I'm hesitant to even think about anymore. I was camping with my cousin Cam, 17 at the time, same age as I was, his little brother Nick, 12, and my aunt and uncle. We were near Cloudcroft, New Mexico, up in the mountains. My uncle had just bought a new camper, and we decided to go camping with it for the weekend. The weather was beautiful, and me and my cousins decided to bring a tent to sleep in instead of the camper. We set up our tent around 60 yards away from the camper and the fire that was right outside of it. Towards the end of the first night, after a long day of exploring, we all decided to lay down for the night. We were not camping on an actual campsite. It's a spot my uncle had found years back, and it was the perfect spot to set up camp. At about 3 a.m., the fire was completely out. My cousins and I were still awake. Nick, being the youngest, was trying to stay up to be cool with us, but ended up falling asleep. It was only Cam and I awake now. We were just shooting the shit, talking about hot chicks from school, brilliant ideas for things that needed to be invented, and slowly started to fall asleep too. All of a sudden, we heard a blood-curdling scream from the distance, probably the same distance away the camper was, only in the opposite direction. Me and Cam both picked up our heads off the pillow and said almost simultaneously, "What the hell was that?" It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a fox. It was big. The closest way I know how to describe it is a mixture between a banshee and a rabid peacock. Its voice was deep and echoed through the deep woods. It let out another blood-curdling shriek, and we both sat upright on our blow-up mattress. Immediately after the shriek, it started clicking, an odd, deep clicking coming from the back of its throat. It was loud enough to hear from the distance too. We were scared, and neither of us had any idea of what it could be. We waited a second, both quiet as a mouse. It let out another scream, followed by a series of clicks, but it seemed to be closer now, maybe 10 yards closer. I looked at Cam, and he looked just as shocked as I was feeling. I was trying to convince myself it was a bird of some sort, or a mountain cat. Then I heard it walking. It was walking on 2 feet, and I could distinctly hear it. It even sounded big, taking huge strides, cracking branches and leaves under its feet as it walked. It sounded like it was coming close to us. It screeched and clicked, loudly again. I could tell it was about halfway to us now. Suddenly, another scream and clicks came from another direction, sounding just as close as the other creature. It sounded more aggressive, more angry, more dominant. The first creature then let out a series of clicks too. Then it hit me. They were communicating. At this point I was terrified, and so was Cam. I had an axe under my blow-up mattress, but I was too afraid to get up and grab it. Then both creatures started walking towards us, but it sounded like they were trying to be sneaky, sneak up on our tent. They were getting closer and closer. The first one screamed loudly. I could tell it was roughly 15 yards away now, and so was the other creature. After screaming, it started clicking again, and the other one clicked back at it. They were both walking closer and closer to the tent. I could hear them both stepping on limbs and leaves, and I could feel the ground thud with each step they took. I was panicking, frantically looking for my axe, while Cam was frantically trying to wake up his little brother. I couldn't find my axe anywhere. I realized I had left it near the campfire because we were using it to cut pieces of wood for the fire. Nick wasn't waking up, and they were getting closer and closer to the tent. Eventually, me and Cam froze. The second one had stopped about 10 feet away from the tent, and the first one was walking right up to the tent. As soon as it was right outside the tent, I yelled as loud as I could out of pure fear to get the hell away from here and leave us alone. It stopped. It was right outside. I could almost see it through the tent. It was huge, tall enough to lean over and look through the top of the tent if it wanted to. I could tell it was slim, and the creature was heavy because of how tall it was. I could feel its energy, and it was very negative. I felt the vibes of the universe. They were telling me that whatever these things were, they were not just here to say hi or steal our hot dogs. I was frozen. They were right outside, and the moon was covered by clouds, so moonlight was no longer shining anywhere. I couldn't even hear it breathing. It was silent. The first one clicked from behind us, still 10 feet away or so from the tent. The first one didn't move. It didn't make a single sound, and it was probably a foot away from the tent. My heart was beating so fast that I thought I was going to pass out. All of a sudden, it took huge steps back, and the second one let out a scream, so loud it hurt my ears. I immediately burst into tears. The creature took off into the woods, pounding the ground underneath it, running on 2 legs faster than Usain Bolt himself. The first one apparently turned around and walked back into the deep woods. I waited until I completely heard its footsteps disappear, until I unzipped the tent, threw a little nick over my shoulder, and we booked it to the camper. We got inside and woke up my aunt and uncle. They had no idea what was going on and urged us to take our asses to bed. We slept in the camper for the next 2 nights, and I didn't leave the campsite for the rest of the trip. I don't know what we encountered that night. All I know is that it was not of this kind. It was not human, not a bear, not a 4-legged animal, and was definitely not a rabid peacock. It has scarred me ever since, and its energy and screams still haunt me to this day. I grew up with my grandparents, whom I referred to as Mom and Dad, because they adopted me at 1 year old, in a house out in the middle of rural New Mexico. The house that we lived in was not very old at the time. It was built in 1988, and these stories would have taken place around 98 to 04, and I believe my parents had moved there in 1994. Here's the first story. One of my earliest childhood memories is from a chair in our living room. It was a fat, fluffy armchair that my mom used to help me get dressed on in the mornings when I was first learning how. When I had learned how to dress myself, she would observe me while cooking breakfast to make sure I didn't put my pants on backwards or something. I would have been around 6 at the time, and I had successfully dressed myself as I was pulling on a skirt, standing in front of the chair facing it. I saw a hand just resting on the carpet, sticking out from the skirt of the armchair. I remember being more confused than frightened, and when I lifted the skirt to look under the chair and saw nothing, I sat back up. I decided to check behind the chair as well, and saw 2 small stocking feet sticking out from under it. I ran to tell my mom about the kid under the chair, but she just laughed and asked me where I get these ideas. The second story. My mom used to sit on the back porch reading books while our dogs would lie around in her company. I woke up late one morning when I was around 10 or 11. It must have been the weekend because I had already missed breakfast for sleeping in. I went to the kitchen to make myself a Pop-Tart. As I was walking to the kitchen table, I saw my mom outside the glass door that led to the porch. She was sitting there and reading, but the dogs weren't hanging out. Kind of weird, but whatever. I eat my Pop-Tart and then wander off to my room to play Neopets most likely, noticing my mom is still reading outside. I don't want to interrupt her reading, so I head along my way to my bedroom. Then I leave my room at some point and see my dad. I go over and say, "Hi, I'm awake." He smiles and says that he was sorry. He was out in his shop building working on something and didn't realize I was awake. He then informs me that I need to clean my room before Mom gets home. I asked where she went since I didn't hear the car, but he said that she had left 3 hours before I woke up and that she would be gone for another hour. Here's the last story. This is the one I think about the most. It still freaks me out. My bedroom was across the hall from my bathroom and was slightly off-center, So from where my bed was positioned, I could almost see into the bathroom. I would have been no older than 7 at this time. I had what I thought was a very cool Minnie Mouse digital alarm clock by my bed. I had awoken suddenly to a noise and I was confused. I looked at my clock and I remember distinctly that it was 3:48 a.m. Then I heard the noise again. I realized that I was hearing the cabinets in a single drawer in my bathroom being opened and closed, and the scraping noises of things being pushed around. I could hear the can of hairspray scooting around and a clack, like a hairbrush had been set down. It sounded like someone was looking for something specific, calmly. There was no banging nor hectic sound to it, just a normal rifling through the drawer's noises. The light was on and I couldn't see anything from where I was laying. Assuming this noise to be my mother looking for her hairpins, I called out to her. The sound ceased and the light stayed on. Thinking she wasn't sure if she heard me, I piped up again. "What are you looking for? Can I help?" Something that sounded exactly like the spooky voice my mother would use when she was teasing me about ghosts sounded from the bathroom. The voice spoke out only in the simple phrase, "It's not your mom. I'm a ghost." The room felt tighter and colder and impossibly darker. I laid there for a while, wondering why my mom was trying to spook me like that, and wondering, what if it was a ghost? I asked my mom about it the next day, and she denied being in the bathroom, stating that she went to bed at midnight. She said I must have been dreaming. I ran it by my dad as well, and he confirmed she was in bed at midnight. This story happened a long time ago, so there are some details I'm missing. My dad only gets 2 weeks of paid vacation a year. This led us to going on vacation during the school year, and I was probably 10 or 11 at the time that this story takes place. My dad and I are big history enthusiasts. We love going to museums and on hikes to see ruins. I have had some pretty strange experiences with the paranormal, but I have never had anything like this before. We were driving from Texas to New Mexico, but we wanted to stop at these Native American ruins before we did. We spent a whole day exploring the area. However, when we went to the actual locations of the ruins, they were still being excavated. I can't remember the name of the tribe, but I remember that they had been a rather large civilization that mysteriously vanished hundreds of years ago. It was pretty cool. You could see the foundations of the building still being buried from the dirt. We were walking around and reading this little pamphlet. I read in the pamphlet that the round buildings were reserved specifically for shamans. I pointed out the information to my dad, and he thought it was really cool. We came upon one of the round foundations that still had the original stairs intact, so we decided that he wanted to go in. I went with him. I think we spent maybe 5 minutes in there, imagining what it would have been like if the building was still intact, and what might have happened in the building. There weren't any rules that said we couldn't go into the buildings, but for some reason it felt really wrong for us to be in there. I had worn the appropriate shoes for exploring, but my feet started hurting immediately after we got out of there. I started feeling extremely uncomfortable. I asked my dad if we could leave, and he started to get angry with me. We were leaving the site, but we stopped to rest because my feet were hurting really bad, and I felt dehydrated all of a sudden. That's when I saw something. I saw it, but I didn't see it with my eyes. It's like I saw it with my mind. The bench we were sitting at had a ledge right behind with trees on it. I saw a man with dark skin and long black hair. I couldn't see his face, but he was watching us. I decided it was best to leave, and immediately hurried my dad out of there despite being scolded by him. I didn't tell my dad until a couple years later, but he thought I was making it up. My grandma believes me though. Out of all of the paranormal encounters I've had, this is the only one where I saw something. I'm 100% convinced that a Native American was mad that we went into their sacred buildings. We couldn't even pretend to be ignorant either. We knew we shouldn't be there. It was sacred.